need me to sign anything, or can I do it later? Okay. So, all right. So, thanks, Sean. This is how Sean Burns is how this got started. So, Sean and I were talking. He was about to have a kid, and I am a parent, and he and his wife were looking into natural health care options for their family. And so, if you read through all the natural health care literature, you're bound to come across something that says that vaccination is not a natural practice and that it's dangerous. And so you're going to run into this kind of rhetoric. And so, I mean, really there's nothing natural about vaccination. It's a practice that can actually harm people. So I went through the same questions when I first had my child for about 10 minutes, and then I realized that that was a silly thing to think about for me. But so it started out as really a personal problem, but we immediately connected it to our professional practice, of course, and our scholarly pursuits. So what does it mean for libraries when you talk about questioning vaccination? One of the main tenets of librarianship is free inquiry, that we want people, if people come to the library, we want to give them the materials that they're asking for. So we try to collect books that represent all viewpoints on a subject, but alternatively, we try to show people the best information. So what does this mean? Is it possible to show people the best information if they're looking for information that is counter science? Interestingly, as soon as I started coming up with my PowerPoint for today, I found that in 2012, the journal Vaccine had a special issue. This was right after I finished my research, that was devoted to the role of internet use in vaccine decisions. And the editor said the question whether education can immunize against anti-vaccination messages is frequently discussed in the literature. Can you immunize people against anti-vaccination? One of the contributors to the issue discussed the postmodern conundrum, which is, I think, what we're dealing with here. And she said, as individuals play a more involved role in their own health care, they do their own research before deciding to vaccinate or do take any health decision. Through the redefinition of expertise and the notion of relativism, postmodernism allows for that information to be interpreted in various ways. Rather than interpretation being wrong, it can be reframed as another way of knowing. And that's really what we found, or what I found. Sean dropped out in order so that he could write his dissertation. And so I did the research. But I see it as a conundrum. Right now I'm teaching intellectual freedom, and there's really not a logical way to deal with this issue that I've found yet. In reference class, we teach our students to go to certain trusted sources. So we might send them, we talk a lot about Medline Plus and other sources from the government. There is a code called the HAN code, Health on the Internet, which points us towards valid information sources that a librarian might look to determine whether or not a site is trustworthy. So we also talk about information literacy. And under this premise, librarians would advocate helping patrons find good information, which is vetted and from an authoritative source. So we help them do their own research, separating out the chaff from the wheat, essentially. So these are the research questions that I went into this with. Sean and I proposed to look at conversations that people were having about vaccination. There's a certain amount of people that search for health information on the internet before they go to their doctor. I don't have the exact figures right now. And a lot of people go to websites that give out advice about health information. We were wondering, are those sites authoritative? How do they claim their authority? Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're decidedly not authoritative. So we also wanted to find out how people talk about authority in regards to the articles and other information. And to do that, we looked at the comments section of articles. where people were talking about vaccination to see when they invoked the idea of authority, trust, and those were the main things that we were thinking about, trust and authority. But we ended up with a lot more ideas once I ended up with a lot more. That was fun.
Would you find that the perception of one topic may lend to a different perception of authority depending on the topic that they're talking about?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sure. When I get into my findings, let's talk about that more. So we'll think about that. But a lot of people trust, themselves as authority, and some people trust the Bible as authority. So those things are all going to come up. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of vaccinations, because this is the part that I didn't get to publish because they didn't want to hear about all of this and where I published it. And I thought it was the most interesting part of the paper altogether. So the first evidence of variolation is in 1000 AD in China. The first English variolation was in 1721. Variolation is different from vaccination because you actually just take the pustule of smallpox, and you would get the material from there and inject it, or injection I think is officially when it becomes vaccination. But there are a number of ways. I believe that the 1000 AD Chinese method was to dry it and then sniff it, and that was a way to get the smallpox, the virus into a person. So but there are different methods of it. There was an account of variolation in Turkey. This is the lovely Lady Mary Montagu, who said, "I'm going to tell you a thing that I'm sure will make you wish yourself here." She was writing a letter to somebody. "The smallpox, so fatal and so general amongst us, is here entirely harmless by the invention of ingrafting," which is the term they give it. "There's a set of old women who make it their business to perform the operation every autumn. The old woman comes with a nutshell full of the matter of the best sort of smallpox, and asks what veins you want to have opened. She immediately rips open that you offer her with a large needle, and puts into the vein as much of the venom as can lie upon the head of her needle. Every year thousands undergo this operation. There is no example of anyone that has died in it, and you may believe I am well satisfied of the safety of the experiment. I am patriot enough to take pains to bring this useful invention into fashion in England. And I should not fail to write that some of our doctors very particularly about it, if I knew any of them that I thought had virtue enough to destroy such a considerable branch of their revenue for the good of mankind." I just love that, though. Ben Franklin was lost one of his sons, and he was accused of variolation. People were not in favor of it at all. It was something that was starting to gain some fashion, but people were very much did not trust it. They thought that it would spread smallpox and kill people, and it did kill people. It killed something like 2 to 3 out of every 100 versus how many people died of smallpox. If you got the smallpox, it was a lot more likely that you would die. But he said that he did not practice variolation with his child. But that was his disclaimer. So some other key moments. In 1777, the Continental Army they were given smallpox variolation. In 1813, the U.S. Vaccine Agency was established. And in 1882, the first meeting of the Anti-Vaccination League of America was held. Some of their ideas were that disease was spread by filth, or something called miasma. So miasma is that it just sort of goes in the air, so you can imagine. There's a strong focus on freedom of religion, tyranny of the state, criticism of allopathy and accreditation, and a belief in the correction of science. So at this time there was a really big controversy between allopathic doctors and non-allopathic doctors. And the non-allopathic doctors hated the ADA, not the ADA, the AMA, the American Medical Association. They thought that accreditation was going to kill them, and it essentially did. And they said that science was very corrupt, and so really, really interesting back and forth about belief about allopathic medicine that was going on back then. So the Anti-Vaccination League really was aligned with the non-allopathic doctors who practiced all kinds of crazy things that were really popular then. And by the 1950s and 60s, pretty much everybody had accepted vaccination, and really there was one writer, Kaufman, who wrote like the history of public health, a really important book about public health, and he said that by then it was accepted. Pretty much everybody was vaccinated, and they thought that the wars about vaccination were over at that point. But then the controversies revived in the 1970s because there were 36 children in Britain who did have some neurological complications after they were vaccinated. And then in 1982, there was a TV program in the United States called Vaccine Roulette. And then Andrew Wakefield's research in 1998, which was published in Lancet, and it was later retracted. And it's a really interesting case because he did some really bad things. He was, in the name of science, he was looking at his children's friends at birthday parties, and anyway, it's very non-scientific work that he did related to gastrointestinal problems that children faced following that he said were caused directly by vaccinations, and those were what led to autism. So he was the one who started the connection with autism in the late 90s, and of course we know what the consequences of that were. So people like Jenny McCarthy, of course, published a book about the evils of vaccination. Exactly, not a good authority, but very accessible. So today, you can go online and you can see a lot of fear-mongering that goes on. This is just a really great picture. There's some others that are amazing that are on some of these websites. They use a lot of really scary tactics to make their point about required vaccinations. And it's really presented much as the same as it was in the late 1880s, as a matter of civil liberties, health, religion. And one of the websites that I looked at actually quoted from publications from the 1880s. It was exactly the same thing. So it's so interesting that they're still referring to the same papers though. But what really makes this difficult to study or to talk about authority is that there are a lot of quotes from doctors that are against vaccination. So these are just 3 of them. Dr. Mendelsohn, MD, Dr. Mendelsohn, MD. I'm not sure exactly who he was. I didn't look into these, but these are from one of the anti-vax sites. I think that Mendelsohn is one of the main anti-vax doctors, saying that SIDS is caused by vaccines. Dr. Douglas, MD. It's so funny that they put that, and I just realized it. Saying that the economic and political import of discovering that immunizations are killing thousands of babies. So I don't know what kind of evidence they have about that, but it has to do with SIDS, so.
Is this in recent, those quotes, or?
Yeah, they're fairly recent.
Fairly recent.
I mean, not really recent, but they're on the website. And so if you were a person who is out there looking for stuff about vaccination, this is the kind of thing that you would run across. So this is another website. Love, rest, exercise, sanitation, nutrition, hygiene, and no vaccines equals health. So I think we really have to remember as librarians, that this fear, it stems from a genuine place in people's hearts. It's not something that you can just educate against, really. These are people who actually do love their kids. They're not just, most of them are not being negligent. It might not be the most intelligent decision in some cases, but we'll look at who does and doesn't vaccinate now, and then you'll see that these aren't all just you know, people who are being careless. So who doesn't vaccinate today? There's really not a firm profile of anti-vaccinators. There were two different articles that I looked at. One of them found, SISLT said, it was the upper middle class, white, educated, and married people, and they really can't be persuaded through education. So in Portland, in some areas, there are hot pockets of non-vaccinators, and they really create their own non-vaccinating culture. So 78% in a Waldorf school in Portland has religious exemptions. So what is a religious exemption? You can claim anything as your religion, and you can get exempted. You just say it's against your beliefs, and that constitutes a religious exemption. In some places, there's some states that don't, where that doesn't fly. I think Mississippi doesn't have any exemptions, and so they have a really high compliance rate, except among people who probably live in the very poorest of the poor areas, and they just don't, you know, I don't know. There's probably some places like that. But this second article, Kennedy, Brown, and Gust, said that it was people with lower incomes, and they don't believe that it offers benefits. So what they see is nobody gets sick from these things anyway, and so that's really where people can be persuaded through education to be vaccinated. So their SISLT really connects the first kind with collective action. So these are groups of people taking collective action against the state when they decide not to vaccinate. And you can see a lot of evidence of that with the online talk. So one thing that the anti-vaxxers do really talk about is that, I mean, there's a lot of distrust. There's distrust of the media, there's distrust of political people, of the CDC. So the current pertussis epidemic, you know, you read about this probably, and there have been outbreaks, you know, in Texas recently, there was one. And so the anti-vaxxers really have this belief that the media is against them, and that they are the ones who are fear-mongering. So. But really one of the problems is that public health in general is not something that people trust, because it operates on coercion, partially. And coercion isn't a way to instill trust in people. So if you look at the literature in public health, there's always going to be this ethical conflict between civil liberties and public health. And the coercion really comes in with public schooling. And because to enroll your child in public school, they have to be vaccinated. So there's a lot of recommendations on these anti-vax sites about how to avoid the coercion by the state. Interestingly, the Public Health Code of Ethics does include provisions for working with the community, that you have to work with beliefs and diverse values. So that demonstrates that there is an internal conflict within public health. Similarly, ALA, American Library Association, says that ethical dilemmas occur when values are in conflict. So the original Code of Ethics of ALA included a mandate to protect readers from harmful material. That was later dropped. Right, John? Yeah, and so I just didn't want to say something wrong, but I'm pretty sure that all this is correct. Because the ALA wasn't advocating being paternalistic towards its the library users, and instead started collecting material from all sides, and that was in about the 1960s. So anyway, the vaccination really is an ethical dilemma, and I don't know, I go into this more in the paper about the free rider problem, but we're not going to talk about it right now because it's not that important right now. This is from the Library Bill of Rights, that libraries provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current and historical issues. Materials should not be proscribed or removed because of partisan or doctrinal approval and or disapproval. So it'd be interesting, I think, to compare the Public Health Code of Ethics with this in a lot more depth. So the internet has given anybody the ability to publish anything, and there were some. This was from Clay Shirky, who wrote "Here Comes Everybody." He talked a lot about mass amateurization, and what he's talking about more is the demise of the press. That the press has traditionally held, the gatekeeper role, and now anybody can publish anything. And so the problem is that if you have misinformation, it can really spread easily and quickly on the internet. And this is, the bottom quote is from Seth Mnuchin from a book called The Panic Virus, which was so interesting. And he's just taking what Shirky's talking about and applying it directly to the vaccination fears. The self-reinforcing nature of online communities and content-starved, cash-poor journalistic culture that gravitates toward neat narratives. So basically, what's going on there is you're trying to simplify everything. There are people on both sides, and they try to ignore each other. Okay, so getting back into libraries. Libraries are good places to find health information. They are places that people trust. If you look into the most trusted institutions, libraries are right up there at the top, along with the Red Cross, I think. Libraries and the Red Cross. Librarians can offer expert search techniques. They have good CAM resources, that is complementary and alternative medicine resources. And there are a lot of consumer health librarians out there who are trained to help people find evidence-based sources to make health decisions, to help them make health decisions. But at the same time, it's really difficult to find information that we know is accurate. There's really interesting literature on that in itself. How do you know that something is accurate? The problem with the vaccination literature is that when you do find things about vaccination that are evidence-based, a lot of the times they do admit to the harm in them, and so, or they might say that there are complications. The package inserts describe complications with them, and so they're written in a language that's really not easy for people to read, right? So when you give somebody, if they want scientific information, you need to make sure that it's something they can read, and at the same time, the public health websites for low-level readers don't acknowledge risk, because their purpose is to make it easy to understand why people should get vaccinated. So this is the HAN code again, the Health on the Internet code, which is really interesting. On their website, they say the internet has become one of the most widely used communication media. With the availability of web server software, anyone can set up a website and publish any kind of data, which is then accessible to all. Same problem that we're talking about throughout this. The problem is that we're no longer finding information, but accessing the credibility of the publisher as well as the relevance and accuracy of the document retrieved from the net. So it's a tool for evaluating information literacy. A publisher can actually get the HAN code added to their website if they give it to the HAN, they give it to this association, and they find out if they are biased, if they've got funding coming from anybody that's inappropriate, if there are any conflicts of interest. And they will let them use the HON code if they find that, that there's very little, that there's less bias, and that it's an appropriate resource. Okay, so on to what I did. So the purpose of this study was to find real-world examples of what people might find if they were searching online for information about vaccinations, and to find out how people discuss issues like trust, authority, risk, and bias. And these are all things that we talk about in librarianship in regards to health information, so I think they're really useful ideas to get our heads around. So the first thing that I did was a website analysis. If people are going to do their own research, they're probably going to go to the web first of all. So I used Copernicus, which is a meta search engine, to collect the websites. I used basically all of the practical search terms that I could come up with, having to do with vaccination, dangers of vaccination, and any immunization. I don't know. I didn't write it all down. I mean, I've got it somewhere, but I don't have it with me. But it was a lot of different words that I searched for, and I came up with about 100 websites. Then I got rid of the duplicates and removed any irrelevant sites because there were a lot about the vaccination of animals and things like that. And I ended up with 55 websites to take a look at. So this is what I found. Out of those 55, 35 said that they're useful and effective, 8 claimed that they're just ineffective, 12 said that they're dangerous or toxic, over half used facts and numbers, and 16 referred to peer-reviewed science. Only 14 of them addressed the risk in vaccinations. Okay, so there were essentially 3 types that I divided it up into: public health sites, which were decidedly pro-vaccination, and I felt like sometimes they dumbed down vaccination questions, like they kind of poo-pooed the questions themselves. Sometimes they did a really good job of answering them, though. They really addressed vaccination questions in an intelligent way. And then there were some sites, like Dr. William Sears. Yes, sir?
Were there some types of sites that tended to do a better job than others?
The best
by
one,
source or?
Yeah, the best site that I found is the History of Vaccines site, and it's from the John Hopkins, no, it's from Philadelphia, Physicians Hospital of Philadelphia or something. First of all, it's a great site, but it really addresses vaccination questions in depth. And it's from a hospital, and it's from like a medical school. So that was the best one that I found. The WebMD, I think did an okay job of it, but it's really, really pro-vaccination, of course. And so if you were anti-vaccination in the first place and somebody showed you that, you would go, well, that's just, I don't know. I didn't feel like it would be a good site to show somebody. Does that answer your question at all? I think academic, the one that I was looking at was an academic site, the best one. William Sears, see, he's a doctor. He claims to be unbiased. He has all kinds of awesome parenting advice, but he is all about alternative vaccination schedules, which is very loose, and so, delay, which is not really a good tactic if you want your baby to live sometimes. And then there are lots of anti-vaccination sites. There are some that were crazy too. And like this one, religious ideology, it links vaccines with abortion. It's a weird site. So I wish that I had pictures to show you. But.
And the search engine pulled that from?
Oh yeah,
Really?
it comes up in the top results. Yeah, when you do a search on vaccination. Okay, so that was the first part that I did. And that part isn't even published because I had to make my paper a lot shorter. So the second thing that I did was I looked at reader commentary in response to different articles. So I kind of obsessively read the comment sections of newspaper articles. So that was probably where this came from. it seemed to me a decent way of looking at how people are talking about these without actually having to do interviews, and which is something that I would like to maybe do in the future. So I looked for articles that had a lot of commentary, where the discussion was really varied and robust. And I looked for different kinds of articles so that it was coming from, there were lots of different types of sources were represented. So one was NPR, one was from Baby Center, which is a parenting forum. One was the Motherload column from the New York Times. One was the Huffington Post. One was from an anti-vax site. And one was from a natural health site. And one was commentary in response to a late line show. Did you have a question? I thought you raised your hand. So I had 1,537 comments, and I analyzed them, and I hired a student to do a second analysis of the files. So we looked for occurrences of different concepts like autism, authority, religion, whether vaccines were good or bad, alternative medical practices, trust, distrust, and personal choice or freedom. So I really used a grounded theory sort of method for that. I didn't go into it thinking about much of anything except for trust and authority. And then I started coding things as I noticed that they were coming up again and again. And this is what it looks like. It's such a pretty tool, I think, so I wanted to share that with you. It's a great tool for sharing files with people because it's web-based, so you can code at the same time, and you code sections, and you can see over here these are the codes. Okay, so who is their authority? 450 excerpts were coded for ideas related to authority, and these were the main codes: self or personal experience, science, government, religion, and big farm. So this is both positive and negative. Hold on, we'll promote those. Some of the examples that I have, sorry about this, and I know it's a wall of text. So the first person, these are just examples of different kinds of authority. This first one is self as authority. As a child, there were countless times where I'd gotten the flu shot and still ended up getting the flu later. I personally think it's more dangerous to inject yourself and your family with a vaccine that contains cancer cells and the threat of an autoimmune disorder when squalene is used in as adjuvant. So you see a lot of these words used over and over again on these discussion boards. I don't really know what they're talking about. Because I think sometimes, I mean, I kind of know what they're talking about now, but I don't think that they really use them properly. It's kind of one of these problems where people read the medical literature and they don't really know what they're talking about, and so they start throwing these words around that sound scary. Sometimes you have doctors on these boards, and there were a lot of comments between, especially on the New York Times and NPR, lots of doctors commenting on it. One time libraries were brought up as a good place for authoritative information, which made me happy. There was a lot of criticism, of course. When you read discussion boards, you see a lot of that anyway. You see people putting each other down. And I love this quote: "The most dangerous words in the English language. We are from the government, and we are here to help you run for your life." And that was a very common sentiment that you saw in all of these, that the government is going to kill you. So, and then the bottom one: liberty, medical freedom, personal liberty, and autonomy over what goes into our bodies are God-given rights, despite what pharma would wish. Tons of stuff about big pharma and how much profit they're making off of the immunizations. But there were other people who corrected them and said, really, they're not making a lot of money off of these, except maybe Gardasil or one of the new ones, because they've been approved for a really long time. They don't cost much, and people get one shot and they're done. So it's not like heart medicine where they make a lot of money. Trust was coded both positively and negatively. And these are some of the I had subcodes for the internet. Vaccine ingredients. Do you trust or do you distrust vaccine ingredients? Big Farm, of course, was mostly negative. There were a few that were not negative regarding pharmaceuticals, like especially when they said they're really not making much money off of this. So that got coded as positive. People mostly trust their doctors, but that is not across the board, because a lot of people who are anti-vax have had to switch their doctors. So there are lists of doctors that you can find who will take you if you are an anti-vaxxer. Most doctors won't even take you because they want kids to have their immunizations, and they also don't want them coming into their practice if they are, potentially carrying diseases. There are fights between parents on here. Some of them are great. Lots about people not trusting insurance. Lots about not trusting the media or scientists in general, which was, that went both ways with trust and distrust. Any questions? No? So these are some examples of the trust and mistrust. The economics of vaccines are different from those of other parts of the medical system. They're not new medicines and consequently have been discounted for a long time compared with brand new drugs. They work very well, which makes them less profitable. I love the second one. Since the vaccines has been discovered, I think we are more protected from most common viruses and bacteria, especially for the newborns, babies, which is so sad. But I included it because, you see stuff like this where she really trusts the leaflet. She says that she reads all the leaflets, she reads the studies, and she speaks to her doctor, and she made the right call for all of her kids. And this was on, I think it was on the baby center, where they're fighting it out. These people are duking it out. You hear a lot of this: follow your mommy tuition. Don't be bullied by doctors, schools, and other parents when it comes to vaccines. If something doesn't feel right or gives you a moment's hesitation, follow that instead.
Two different people, I can tell.
Yeah, completely different. They really, they duke it out on these stuff. And then in the bottom, talking about flaws in their, it was always this, the anti-vaxxers would say, this is the most biased article that I've ever read. They're completely ignoring all the science about what harm comes out of vaccines and how it causes cancer and all these other things. So,
interestingly, just this week on NPR, it was just a report, but India is now polio-free.
oh,
There has not been a reported case in 3 years.
wow,
Because of the Salk oral vaccine.
yeah.
Didn't the government set up that goal like
Yes.
2 years ago? That they
Yes,
sold it
to
to
become polio-free.
Did they,
Require
yeah.
the vaccination.
yeah.
They are.
So now anti-vaxxers can go to India without fear. No, that was one of the things that, that came up, was one of the reasons to vaccinate is if you do travel to countries where they have these diseases still, that you need to be vaccinated. Okay. So a lot of people really didn't understand what they read. And there were a lot of calls for more information on these boards. I didn't really have a good solution for this, except that maybe more librarians need to be paying attention to what's going on the boards, but you can't say you should be interfering with the conversations, because that would be insane. There are conversations everywhere, and you can't just butt in. But I think just knowing that there is this need for more information and more good information is important, and also knowing the arguments that people are having about it. I think it could change the way that we present the information to people, which is really important. The main thing, you need to be able to present what's available in terms of evidence. So you need evidence-based medicine about these issues. And there are other ones. There's, like for instance, screening for breast cancer is really controversial because a lot of people now are saying that the screening can possibly cause cancer, and they're saying don't get screened as often. So I don't have a great answer in conclusion. except one solution that I came up with is maybe creating local portals where being aware of what's going on in your community so that, I think having only a national database isn't necessarily the most effective way to do it. Normally, I think that consolidating that might not lead to more trust because people do tend to trust their local librarians. And so being aware of what's going on in your community regarding questions about things like this vaccination, any other controversial thing, if you can work with them to collect for your community. Do you have better ideas about this? What it means for practice?
One of the things that we need is to I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, is to become better versed in evidence-based professions, especially medicine. Librarians are certainly not health professionals, but is it librarians' responsibilities to become aware of evidence-based findings when it comes to frequently asked questions, such as vaccination? Imagine yourself a librarian at Multnomah County Library in Portland, where there are a lot of anti-vaxxers, and somebody is going to come to the public library and say, I'm confused. What should I do, or where should I go about this? Do you simply follow the Library Bill of Rights and Intellectual Freedom Manual and present them with, well, here's
all
an
sides.
anti-vaccination site, and
Yeah.
here's a pro-vaccination site. Read them both and decide for yourself.
Yeah.
Or do you actually delve into the science behind this and let somebody know that there are risks with vaccines as there are risks with everything, but the risk is much greater if you don't vaccinate. That is probably the evidence that the medical community would point to at this point in time.
Yeah.
And look at successes in eradicating diseases through vaccination. And we don't die from smallpox anymore.
Right, exactly.
In the United States.
And
because
people don't know
we're
how
vaccinated.
nasty smallpox is anymore, but man, if you look at some pictures of smallpox, maybe you could show people that.
Well, we don't die from the Black Death too much anymore in the United
Yeah.
States. Either.
Yeah, it's a tough call though, trying to talk about this at all is, if you look at the literature though, I think it's Hjorland, he's very much in favor of presenting people with evidence-based.
No, he's opposed to it.
He's opposed to it.
He's opposed to evidence-based librarianship.
He is?
Yeah.
Okay, who was it then?
Very critical of it. But there is a journal, evidence-based
Evidence-based.
librarianship.
Okay. Well, there was one in here, should we try to give people the best information? And it was about breast cancer. I thought it was Yorland, but it might not have been. He was saying, yes, we do have to look at the science. We've got to, librarians have got to. And if you can't do it, then you need to be humble enough to turn to your local public health librarian, and I think that humility is something that needs to be practiced a lot more. Saying, I don't have the best evidence, so I need to turn to somebody else. But anyway, I think that as a library educator, it's something to talk about with our students. And so I try to talk about it with them and try to make them realize that information literacy is probably going to point you towards the good sources,
But
not just
I'm
any
about to go on a
sources.
campaign myself.
Okay.
You've seen ads on TV for personal injury lawyers. It says, have you been exposed
Yeah.
to asbestos? Well, you may be at risk for mesothelioma.
Yeah.
If your family member or anybody has
It's died.
contracted this or died, come see me, R.Q. Shyster,
Yeah.
Esquire. I saw one just the other day, said that linked ovarian cancer, it was a personal injury.
Yeah.
Linked ovarian cancer with talcum powder. Johnson's baby powder specifically, and shower to shower. The brand.
Okay.
Really?
I don't know too many people who don't use talcum powder,
Yeah.
and it seems that's probably a stretch, but I'm gonna go on an anti-talcum powder campaign and put up a site.
Well, it depends how they're using the powder.
Yeah.
I mean, put it all joke aside, it's at the end of the day, it's people decide what to do with the evidence and what are their deeming authority. I mean, is it the evidence itself, or my experience,
Yeah.
or my doctor? I mean, or their religious belief.
Yeah. It's a fascinating subject, though. It's really interesting to think about. I can't say that I have a lot of answers, though. But you can see the paper. It is. This is it right here. Forthcoming. So I believe that I had better conclusions that I managed to eke out at the end of that paper. Its recommendations would be required for a publication, rather than saying I don't know, but that's what it is.
What it is, what it is.
That's what it is. So, anyway, that's it. That's all I have to say. We're out of here early, so give me questions or.
I just have, it's kind of interesting question, because I'm always being opposed to the flu shots.
Yeah.
Because I read the evidence and said, no, they make you sick, it never works. Then when I saw a couple of cases last year, I was like, finally, I'm gonna do this, because
Yeah.
I was on the side about that. But going back to this, do you think that there's content that, for example, WebMD tends to be more prescriptive, like
Yes.
self-diagnose? Are prescriptive resources or websites tend to have more authority over descriptive ones in people's perceptions?
Totally depends on the person, I think. A lot of people want to be told what they're supposed to do, and that's what I was seeing on some of these discussion boards.
Mhm.
They wanted somebody to actually help them make a decision because they were confused. And so those would be the people with whom, for WebMD would be an awesome choice. Let me just pull up, since we've got some time, I'm going to show you the history of vaccine site, because it is really wonderful. And you can see how they address vaccination questions. Oh, is it not going to work? It's up here on mine, but it's not showing. Come on, show. It's not showing up.
Do you have to drag the window or something, the window to the other side? I don't know if it's duplicated kind of thing.
Maybe so.
Try to drag the window like to the left or the right. I don't know if it's duplicated or something, or extend it on here.
Well, it's not that important. It's not. Yeah, it's not showing up. I'm sure there's probably some thing up here that says it's a box or something. It's a Chromecast, that wouldn't be it. Anyway, it's not that important, but you can go there on your own and you can see the way that they address the vaccination questions, which is, I think, very even-handed. And they've got all these games that kids can play about stopping outbreaks and stuff like that, so it's...
It's for the CDC.
Exactly.
And wash your hands.
Yeah, exactly. So, anyway. All right, well, thanks. Thanks,
Thank you.
little tiny group.
There was a story I